Agenda here. We're going to start off by talking about verifying our existing CAD standards. So the idea is that you'll want to view your CAD standards as they are right now and the applicable ones, because not everything that you have documented for your current CAD standards will necessarily translate to Revit standards, Revit BIM standards, because a lot of the drafting aspects of CAD are automated inside of Revit, so some of that just kind of goes away, but some of it will be important, and we'll discuss those key items that you want to be conscious of as you verify your existing CAD standards and prepare those to be done on the Revit side. Then the next step will be we'll create the Revit template. That's going to take us all of 15 to 30 seconds. And then we'll start getting into the key aspects of what we want to be conscious of when creating that Revit template. And there's essentially four or five different areas that we want to be conscious of. And we'll show key examples in each of these. We're not going to go through everything because that would just take too long. But we'll show you kind of key examples so that way you get the idea of how this would apply to other similar types of standards and families when we move forward. So first of all, we'll establish Revit annotation, dimensions, tags, text, that type of thing. How would you go about doing that? Basically bringing over your CAD standards over into Revit. Then we'll establish our system families, which system model families more specifically. That would be things like stairs, floors, walls, roofs, things like that. Then we'll talk about establishing our loadable families. Any of those families, especially manufacturer families. If you're coming from an MEP background, you'll be doing this a lot, and less so, but still from a structural and architectural perspective, you'll want to be conscious of how to get those loadable families into your Revit project or into your Revit template, so that way it's good for all your users moving forward. And then we'll also want to finally establish our Revit settings. Key settings that have to do with the project, so that way they match as closely as possible what we're trying to do in CAD currently. So again, we present as seamless as a transition to our clients as possible when we hand them our deliverables. Right? So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those into the questions panel. I would suggest as soon as you got a question, put it in there. I probably won't address it because the size of the class immediately, but as soon as I get a chance to, and probably toward the end of the class when we open up the floor to everyone, I'll go ahead and answer those questions in the order that they come in. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and move forward into, in this case, AutoCAD. I'm going to start off with AutoCAD instead of Revit. And so I've got AutoCAD in front. Again, you might be using a different CAD platform and you're transitioning over to Revit. So the tools that we use inside of AutoCAD may not be exactly the same, but hopefully you'll get the analogies to whatever software you're using. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here in the first overall step is to verify the existing CAD standards. And one of the first things we'll want to verify inside of CAD are the units that we're using. And so in AutoCAD, if I go ahead and type in UN at the keyboard, units, it brings up the drawing units dialog. And key things like architectural really doesn't drive much, except it will drive, of course, whether you're using feet and inches versus decimal. So I guess that is important. And then the precision, what kind of precision are you typically using on your project for your dimensions? This will not be necessarily applicable in Revit, but some of the items with your text styles and your overall project units will come into play. So you'll want to be conscious of these things. Your angles, what kind of angle type do you use as far as the units are concerned? And there's really not much more beyond that. A lot of the units in Revit will be more, as far as more detail is concerned, as comes with the other disciplines, structural. But the basics we want to be conscious of: is it imperial versus metric, etc. What are we doing on the AutoCAD side? We want to make sure that gets transferred over to the Revit side. Okay. The next thing we'll want to be conscious of are line weights and line types. So I believe if I type in line weight, don't spend much time in AutoCAD these days, but when I do, I'll open up this dialog here, line weight settings, and here again, what are your line weights right now in AutoCAD? Those will be important as far as determining your plotted line weights inside of Revit. So which line weights do you use? Do you use all of them here, or do you just use like 3 or 4 of these, or 5 or 6, or whatever number you use? Document which ones you typically use, and the sizes of those line weights. And of course that kind of gets into the layers. And if I go ahead and type in layer here, we get our layer dialog. Now this might be based off of our template, which layers we use for the majority of our projects. And the way AutoCAD typically organizes lines and circles and blocks is they put it onto layers, and the layer structure, this is probably based off the AIA standards, so this is all casework. This is all doors, right? Your doors will go on this layer, and you also have additional layers that are beyond the main layer, for example, for demolition and for existing, that type of thing, or for tagging. Again, a lot of this is automated in Revit, and Revit does not use layers, but what it does use is categories. So again, think of the layer that might correspond to the category in Revit. So in this case, the A door layer would be analogous to the doors category inside of Revit, and therefore take a note of what the aspects of that layer typically are, as far as what the finished plotted line weights are going to be. So for example, doors, they use the color green. The line type is continuous. Okay, so that's all good to know. And so then when I actually let me think about this a second. When I go to the plot dialog here and we look at our pin table, this is another thing that we want to be conscious of when we're setting up our Revit standards. Is okay, what does color 3 plot to as far as the line weight? 0.3000. That's the line weight that it's mapped to. Okay, so with all that in consideration, then I know potentially what I need to map my categories to inside of Revit. What line weight do we want to use? What line type do we want to use based off what we see here in the layer dialog? Again, for doors, so again, continuous, right? For at least some of these layers. And for demo B -2, but that's the thing with Revit. Revit doesn't really work with layers in the sense of using layers to show existing versus demolished. That's all handled through the phasing aspect of Revit, which is basically applying a factor of time to our model. So again, a lot of this stuff that we used to manage with layers goes away, but it's key information that we need to know regarding the layer, the color, the line type, etc. We need to document that one way or another, refer to the spreadsheet that where we have our BIM or when we have our CAD standards, when we make that when we address that inside of Revit. Okay, other things to be conscious of: hatch patterns. And let me go to settings here, where we see the hatch patterns that are loaded inside of AutoCAD. Now we may have some custom hatch patterns that we've used over the years. For example, this looks like a custom hatch pattern that was developed. Well, basically Revit uses the same file that AutoCAD uses to develop its fill patterns. And so if you know where your pat files are, and let me just bring over Windows Explorer here so I can show you what I'm talking about. So here we have our, we have a couple of modified or customized hatch pattern files that have been developed. Well, Revit will go ahead and actually access these immediately, or not access them, but you can bring them into Revit and bring your own custom fill hatch patterns that you developed in AutoCAD over to Revit, and you'll have them available, and we can show you how to do that later. Okay, annotation. Obviously we want to pay attention to what kind of annotation we've been using over the years. So what annotation do we use with our dimensions, with our text, with our tags, etc.? That's important, because once we know what text styles we're using, we can potentially use those on the Revit side, especially if they're true type. fonts. If they're not, if we've been using shape files all these years, excuse me again. Sorry about that. So again, if we've been using special shape file fonts for our our text inside of AutoCAD, those won't translate over. So you'll have one of two options there. You'll need to essentially develop a TrueType font using a third-party program that will look a lot like your shape font, or have somebody else do it for you, basically to create that TrueType font from the shape font, or you'll need to just basically adopt a TrueType font that looks as much like your traditional shape font as possible. That's the answer there with your special customized annotation that you might have developed over the years when you used shape fonts as opposed to TrueType fonts. Okay, materials. If you use materials inside of AutoCAD, Revit uses, because it's all Autodesk, they use the same materials library. If it's a different platform, you may have to redevelop those using the Autodesk material library. And then finally, title blocks. You can see here the title block. You'll, of course, typically have a separate file for your title block, and we'll show you how to develop those inside of Revit. But that's one of the other things that you'll need to be conscious of, besides other blocks and stuff like that. That again, blocks you don't really translate over, but I guess I kind of stepped on myself there. But with a lot of your libraries that you developed over the years, actually it's a good thing to talk about in AutoCAD. They may not necessarily apply in Revit. There might be some occasions where you do have some 2D blocks that you do want to bring into Revit, but for the most part, you're working with 3D elements and families inside of Revit. They're not going to apply. So a lot of those block libraries that you develop, you won't necessarily need when you transition your standards over to Revit. So those are some of the key things that you need to be conscious of on the AutoCAD side when you verify your existing CAD standards. Okay. And just again, we documented this all inside of Pinnacle, so you can basically follow the workflow in a very consistent way and bring your standards over. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull up Revit. And we'll find Revit here. So here's our Revit 2016. And what we want to do now is create a Revit template. And we're going to do this from the perspective of an architectural firm. But if you come from a different background, the principles will apply. So in other words, if you're your mechanical MEP firm, what you'll probably do here, you'll go to New, and in the template file you'll choose Mechanical Template, and then select Project Template here to create a new project template, not a new project. Again, we're going to do this from an architectural standpoint, but you see, if you're a structural firm, you choose Structural Template, etc. Construction modeling firm, use Construction Template. But we'll use Architectural Template, choose the Project Template, because we're creating a template from a template. The idea being that the architectural template already has some of the basics that we would normally need as a baseline for our architectural firm and our standards. So I'll click OK. And this is going to call it Template 1 or Template 2, something like that. And I'm going to save it, and we'll put this under our either under Standards Library. I'm going to put this under my class file here. So let me find it here, RVT, and then Establishing Revit Templates. And we're going to call this, and again, whatever your naming convention is. In this case, we tend to do here EP as an Eagle Point _ architectural template. And click OK, and basically that's the name of our template. Now we go ahead and start customizing it based off of our existing standards and other standards that we need to be conscious of on the Revit site. So let's talk about those standards that we need to be conscious of on the Revit site. Overarchingly, we have annotation families, we have model system families, we have model loadable families, and we have the settings. Those 4 key areas. So first we'll talk about Revit annotation family standards. So text and dimension types. Remember, we on the AutoCAD side, we want to go into our dimensions and text and figure out exactly what the standards are right now. Well, we can customize the out-of-the-box stuff here in Revit so we can match what we're trying to do on the CAD side. To do so, go to the Annotate tab, and for dimensions, click on the dimension slider here, and you'll notice that there are several dimension types that we can then modify. Basically, these are the families. Linear dimension types is a family, angular dimension types is a family, radial dimension types is a system family, and then we can customize and create as many dimension types as we need inside of Revit. So for example, let's say we need to customize the linear dimension type, so I'll click on this, and let's say we don't use this Arial font, so I might go ahead and duplicate one of the existing family types. These are system families, so we want to we basically duplicate existing types, and I'll call it Batang, and then modify them. So that's the font I'm going to use, and just go down here to the font being used. Right now it's Arial, but I'll change it over to Batang. And then we can change the text size. Maybe it's 1/8 instead of 3/32. I probably need to rename that there. And besides that, you know, we have all these, the tick marks and the extensions and the witness lines and all that. And obviously that corresponds to what we do. I didn't show this on the AutoCAD side, but you know, you do your DDIM, hit modify here, figure out what the corresponding setting here is here on the AutoCAD side, and then translate that over on the Revit side in this dialog here. And once you're done, let's go ahead and rename this, call it 1/8 inch Batang. Then we made that adjustment. Now you might think, you know, on the AutoCAD side, and depending how you did things, if you use annotated dimensions, you're probably set. But a lot of us, at least from a traditional background, may have had dimension styles or dimension types on the AutoCAD side for every scale. That's not necessary here in Revit. This is a plotted size 1/8 inch Batang. Let me just put some geometry in here real quick, and we'll create a dimension from this guy. And so if I go ahead and select it here, and we'll change it over to that type. So let's say I've got a few more things to adjust, but the point is that I don't need to create a different dimension style for different scales. Right now this particular view is at 1/8 inch equals a foot. If I change it to 3/4 equals a foot, you know, it will size that down automatically, the text, so that way it still plots at 1/8 of an inch when this is placed on a sheet. Okay, so Revit handles that all automatically for you. It's like annotative text inside of AutoCAD, if you're familiar with that, or something analogous to that in other CAD platforms. Okay, so that's dimension types, and obviously we'd need to do this not just for linear, but for angular dimension types, diameter, radial, etc. To customize those with the right fonts and have everything looking the way we'd need it. So that would be the object or the exercise there. For text, it's similar. The text styles are found here under the text panel. There's a little arrow here launching the text types. Actually, it's text types, not styles. That's an AutoCAD term. And then in the type properties dialog again, let's say that, yeah, I need a 1/8 inch Batang text type. Okay, so I'll just duplicate this and do much the same. The exercise is actually much simpler here with the text type. A lot fewer settings to change. And then I'll change the text font to Batang. And again, shape fonts aren't going to be available to you, but any true type fonts are. And we discussed that earlier. And so I now have a 1/8 inch Batang. Actually, I went ahead and I didn't actually change the type here. Let me do that real here quick. Yeah, I changed 1/8 inch Arial, but didn't rename it to Batang. So let me do that. And there we go. Now I've got that text type. If I go ahead and launch the text tool, we can place this. And now, you know, and again, I'm going to delete all this geometry inside of my template later. A lot of times I just want to test it first, make sure it looks okay. Go ahead and get rid of it now. But the point is that text type is now defined. A lot of these text types that come out of the blocks, if you are not needing those, you can certainly get rid of those using the purge unused, and that will allow you to get rid of system family types that you don't need, that you're not using. Okay, but you want to probably wait to do that exercise until we've got all this other stuff done. All right, now title blocks. Title blocks are obviously very, very important for a lot of us. And in order to customize your title blocks, we actually have a class on this where we go into much more detail. on title blocks. But that said, let's go ahead and quickly show the essential steps here. So on the AutoCAD side, you know you've got your title block here. I'm just going to open up the title block drawing. So the way this would work there on the Revit side, to create your own title block family, that's what the what you would do here. I'd go to the application menu, go to new, title block, and I'd probably choose the title block closest to the size that I've got over there, which is a 34 by 22. And I'm basically selecting here a template, a Revit family template file. And so this happens to be a title block template. And here I'll just adjust the line work here to make it 22 by 34. Okay, and then the next step would be to insert that CAD or import that CAD title block into this particular drawing. So I'll do that. Do it, let's just do it center to center here. I may need to adjust things some. Actually doesn't look too bad. If you need to adjust the margins initially, it's probably a good thing to do. So let's say that this is actually 1 inch. I can actually slap on a dimension here and move it over so it's 1 inch away. And the nice thing about leaving, you can actually leave these dimensions around after you're done bringing in your title block, because the dimensions will not plot inside of the project environment. Okay, and so what I'll do here is I'll place some additional lines by simply hovering over and clicking on top of the CAD lines. It's just simply that easy as far as getting in the Revit line work here. And then as far as the text are concerned, the text of the title block is concerned, you would use two tools inside of here. The first tool you'd use for static text would be actually the text tool. So the issue date here, go ahead and place that. And obviously this text is way too big, but we can fix that by simply correcting the text type. So I duplicate the type, or maybe we'll just keep it here and we'll call it 1/8 inch, and I believe that's Century, or 1/16. I think it's Century Gothic is the text font being used here. And click OK. And then place that, put it where it needs to be. Basically, I'm just using my CAD title block as a template to kind of work on top of. And then these guys right here, the text that is going to be changing depending on the project, well, that is covered with what we refer to in Revit as a label. And again, if you come from an AutoCAD background, the most analogous thing to a label is an attribute definition. So I'll go ahead and place a label here, and same deal. In this case, that's the issue date, so I'll look for the corresponding category parameter. So project issue date, bring that over, place it there. And then, of course, again, we'll need to edit the label such that we're using the right size font. What was it? Century Gothic. Centuries. Can't spell. And then text size was maybe 1/8 or 1. Oh, we'll just do 1/16 again. I can't remember what size it was. But the point is, bring it over here. You can change the sample value of the label by editing the label and saying, yeah, let's go ahead and match what we're doing right there. That 0409. I can't remember what the date was. I'll just go ahead and do something like that. Click OK. And and obviously I've got a few more things to change, but that's what's going to happen. That's what you're going to do. And then when you're done with all these, adding the static text and the dynamic text, and we go into much more detail in our classes on Sheets, you basically delete this guy and you can load this into your project with all the information and the line work, and basically you've got a title block ready to go. Obviously I should save it, probably call it EP 34 by 22 title block. And as it is a loadable family, you'd want to load it into the project, or in this case into the template, and now it's going to be available for Sheets for your users going forward. It's going to be under, I believe, annotation symbols and title blocks, I think. There it is, EP 34 by 22 title blocks. So that can be used now in sheet views. Okay, so those are the essential steps. Again, I skipped over a lot of things there, but you hopefully get the general idea. Okay, tags, obviously very important. Let's go into AutoCAD here. So here you have a tag. You need to bring over your tags into Revit. Well, the essential workflow therefore in this case is to, again, something similar. Go to New, in this case, annotation symbol. Select the appropriate category because that was a door tag. So this would work for category tags and multi-category tags. So again, door tag. Select that particular Revit family template. Same sort of workflow. Import the geometry from the CAD. Bring it in origin. Origin here should come in right at the center. And then again, same deal. Basically, we use our pick lines tool to place our lines over there, and we then use our label to place the mark of the door. Okay, find that here, bring over the parameter, and basically again load that into the project. We'd get rid of the CAD file first before we actually load it in the project, but you get the idea. Same general process with our tags. Keynotes essentially work the same way as far as the keynote graphics and the label itself. That said, keynotes have a special place to set them up to determine where you're actually pulling the keynote information from. So if that's your situation, you're using keynotes inside of Revit, which a lot of people do because they're very they're intelligent keynotes and they're very useful. Then you have the basically you go to keynote settings here and you specify which keynote file you're pulling from. Are you pulling from one of the out-of-the-box keynote files to use the construction division keynotes, or are you instead going to use instead of construction division, are you going to use your own user keynotes instead? And then you would basically create your own user keynote file. We talk about that in our annotation class. Okay, so in depth. But that's basically what you would do as part to set up your keynotes. So that way, again, when your user uses your template, they'll be using the right keynote file. It'd be passed to the right place. Symbols. Symbols are right here, and same basic workflow as we were working with on the tags and title block. You have your existing north arrow symbols in CAD. You bring those into your Revit, the appropriate Revit family template. In this case, probably generic annotation, a Revit family template, and there you'd basically trace on top of that and dress it up, and then you'd have it available to bring into Revit. You'd load it into your family here. Okay, there's a bunch of other miscellaneous things like color fill legends, material tags, beam annotation tags, but the workflow again is essentially the same. Open up the appropriate Revit family template, bring in your CAD geometry, trace over top of it, load it into your Revit project. Okay, the second area of 4 that we're going to be talking about are establishing system families. So on the system families side, one of the key system families that you want to be conscious of are things like level datum. Okay, let me go to an elevation view. Your level datum, let's say that you don't use the out-of-the-box level datum graphics. Well, what you would do then, the way level datum work, there's system families. I click on the edit type here, and with any system family, you're going to be duplicating existing family types or renaming them, and then potentially pointing to other graphics. And in this case, the level datum is pointing to a loadable family called level head circle. Okay, so let's say that I don't like the level head circle. I want to use a different level head for our graphics. Well, if that was the case, then I would go ahead and find that here under the in the project browser, level head circle. This is a loadable family. I'd edit that family potentially, and then maybe change the graphics in here, do something different. I'm just going to do this real quick. In fact, let me just get rid of the circle there just to show you what we're doing here. I'll load it back into the project. I could overwrite this, or I could have it point to a different family altogether, but you see how that can be modified. Obviously, the point is that some of these system families are pointing as part of the type properties pointing to a given loadable family. You'll need to edit the loadable family or bring in another loadable family and then point to that in the type properties of that particular object. Okay, or create your own types, duplicate the types, and leave the out-of-the-box types alone. You have that option as well. Okay, now as far as kind of real geometry walls, if you're an architect, you're going to be spending potentially a lot of time developing wall types. Now, one consideration here is that with walls, and again, we have classes on walls, create your own wall types. Revit out of the box gives you these wall types. You may find some of these useful, you may find some of them not. You may find that you're always using the same wall types. Basically, again, the same general idea. Let's say you have a 6-inch brick generic wall type, just to use it as an example. I duplicate an existing type, I rename it, call it 6-inch brick, and then I would change the properties of that wall. Again, we talk about this in much more detail in our walls class, but the point is here, adjust the properties here. You'd create as many of these as you need for your project. Again, some advice: don't create every wall type that you could potentially need in a given project, because that's just going to clutter your template with wall types that users probably won't need. Just put in the wall types that you know that your users are using pretty much on every project, that aren't already provided here on the out of the box, or with your naming conventions, whatever you typically like to use on your projects from project to project. And the same would apply for floors, stairs and ramps, roofs, ceilings. All those basically work the same way. You take the existing system family types, you duplicate them, you change the structure, you change the name, you change the materials as much as you need, and then you're off and running. You have the wall types and floor types, the essential wall types, floor types, ceiling types, roof types in your project that your users need as a good starting point. On the mechanical side, you have ducts and pipes. It's a little bit different on the mechanical side. Let's just go to our duct types here. And again, we're not going to have much here, essentially because this started off as an architectural template, but the essential workflow is the same. You'd have the existing types, let's say, and you duplicate those. And so we have, and I'll just rename this, called our duct type. And the key difference between, for example, walls and ducts when it comes to these system family types is in the type properties dialog. What really differentiates one duct type from another that you use in your projects are the routing preferences. And so you'd edit these routing preferences to essentially point to the elbows, T's, junctions, any of the fittings that you would use for that given duct type. And obviously you would have those types loaded into your project already. That would be part of your process as far as setting up your template, making sure that any of your fitting families, your loadable fitting families, are available in your template, and then you can use your duct types. You can modify your duct types to point to those fittings. Same for pipes as well. Basically, pipes work exactly the same as ducts, and conduit and cable tray are very similar as well. So that would be the exercise for those system family types. On the structural side, you have foundations, like slab and wall foundations, which are also system family types. Again, same general workflow. Duplicate the existing types that are there, modify them, and again, use the ones that you know are going to be commonly used throughout all your projects. Avoid putting system family types in there that are going to be infrequently used, as they'll just kind of bloat your template. Okay, so that's the system family types aspect of your setting up your templates that you'll want to be aware of. On the loadable families side, for example, doors. Let's say that we're an architect. We need to have a variety of door types in here, and out of the box, the architectural template are going to give you very few door families here. In fact, right now we only have the single flush family with all the types here. So as a BIM manager, you may be interested in having some basic door types in here, so that way folks don't have to go looking for them. One of the first places to start would be to use the out-of-the-box families that Revit provides that they didn't necessarily put into the template. To get to those, you'd go to the potentially to the Insert tab here, and then click on the Load Family tool, and then browse to the appropriate folder where those are found. So I'd click on the Doors folder, and here, maybe we use double glass doors all the time, so I'd select that. Click Open. You'll bring in this case, this has a type catalog, so you don't have to bring in every type of this particular family. You can just bring in the ones that you would use pretty often. So let's say we just use these 3. I'll click OK. And then those are now part of my template here. Those loadable families are part of my template. Okay. And you could do this exercise for other loadable families. Now that said, Revit provides some out-of-the-box kind of standard, very generic geometry related door types, and this applies to windows and other other categories of items. Let's say that you specify particular manufacturer families. Okay, so in that situation, a lot of manufacturers have provided Revit families for you to use, so that way you specify them on your projects. At least that's their hope, right? So under the Insert tab, there is a tool here called Autodesk Seek, where you can look for additional families that have been given, I would say, the blessing of Autodesk. They've been more vetted, or they've definitely been vetted, and there's more of a likelihood that these families are going to work for you. They're not going to be broken, or they're not going to be broken by newer versions of the software. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to search for, like, for example, Pella door. And this will launch my browser, which is on my second screen. Let me pull it over here. And so it brings up Pella is one of those manufacturers that's working with Autodesk and providing content here. And so I see, oh yeah, here's one of the doors I need. I need a vinyl sliding patio door. So I'll click on the RFA here, and I'll choose the RFA that I want. So I'll choose this one right here, this version, and then I'll download this as soon as I find the download button. There it is. And hopefully it doesn't make me log in. If it does, I'll have to log in. Bummer. So anyway, you'll see my login name there. That's fine. And I'll log in here, bring the let me download that again. And this will basically download it to my downloads folder. Show the folder here, and let me just drop that into my model. And basically now, and it's going to upgrade it if it's an older version, and it should appear now underneath my doors category. And the idea is here, this is going to be the exercise for all of my category, family category items that need to be part of my project. So, I'm going to do this for my windows. Let's see, I need a wall in here first, don't I? So anyway, I'm not going to actually play. I'll just leave it as is right now. But the point is this is now part of my project, and and it's part of my project template. And then users that use my project template will automatically have this Pella door available to me. And so the process is exactly the same for Windows. You start off with whatever's there in the project template. You say, oh, well, that's not good enough. Let's go out to the out-of-the-box family library. If what's out there is not good enough, I go out to Autodesk Seek. If that's not good enough, then simply go out to on the internet, go to the manufacturer's website, and download the families from there. And usually they'll have a BIM section, a Revit family section, something like that. So if you're searching in Google, it'd be something like Pella BIM family library or BIM Revit family library, something like that. That should point you to the right content, and you should be able to then basically download that and then put it into your project. And this is going to apply to any loadable families that are produced by manufacturers. And so this applies to Windows, it applies to beams potentially, although the beams that come out of the box with Revit are pretty sufficient because they're cribbed right from the Steel Handbook. And other things like sprinklers, electrical devices on the electrical side, you may get those from the manufacturer. Certainly plumbing fittings, though a lot of manufacturers are producing those, like Victaulic and other fitting providers, etc. And essentially you load those in. Again, if you go straight to the manufacturer's website, you may find at times that those families may not fully work with your project. That's a common thing we get at Eagle Point is, hey, can you make my manufacturer family work? And we'll try to make that work for you if possible. through technical support. So, but the point is that that's one thing that that happens a lot with manufacturer families. They may not be 100% ready for the version that you happen to be working on inside Revit. Okay. Finally, the last item that we want to be aware of as BIM managers, we've talked about loadable families, we've talked about system families, and we've talked about annotation. The last thing is our settings, and settings are, of course, very important for our BIM standards, and this really gets into where we were talking about earlier about units, for example. So when it comes to units, go to the Manage tab, go to Project Units, and the units that we established on the CAD side, we'll want to establish here. Do we use feet? Do we use meters? Are we metric? Are we imperial? And on the in a more specific way, Revit has, if you're going to use any of the analysis tools, or you're going to pull information from your objects, for example, or you're going to pull reactions from your beams, well, then you may want to adjust the units here on the structural side. Are you going to do kips? Are you going to do meganewtons? Whatever makes sense for your construction and documentation standards. You may not have to have worried about that on the CAD side, because you were just displaying text that you pulled from an analytical program, for example, on the structural side. But here in Revit, you will potentially need to, because the data is actually contained in the Revit model, you'll need to make sure that your units are correct to whatever discipline you're working on. And so you have HVAC, electrical, piping, and energy units as well. Okay, materials, again, Autodesk uses the same materials library between AutoCAD and Revit. I always hate launching this dialog because it always takes a long time the first time I launch it. But in the material browser, then, it's pulling this from the AutoCAD library now, or the Autodesk library, but AutoCAD and Revit uses that same file. And here you may need to go ahead and create additional materials for specific situations. If that's the case, we have a class specifically on materials where we walk you through what all these tabs mean, and how they relate to your material, and how to create your own custom materials as well. Okay. So again, that's one thing you may need to be aware of as a BIM manager. Snapping, there is a snaps where you can set this up. This is a user-based thing. This really isn't a BIM manager thing. This is per user, but again, this is something as a BIM manager you want to be aware of when you're helping out your other users to understand, okay, by default we want these snaps on, or we don't want these snaps on. Fill patterns, or which are analogous to hatches, go to additional settings, go to fill patterns. And remember when I was talking about earlier where we had those custom hatch patterns and we want to pull them into Revit? Well, it's not hard to do. For example, let's say we had a fill pattern that we want to add. All I would need to do here is I would basically click New, and then I'm going to click Custom. I'm going to click Import. In other classes, I go through this a little bit more slowly, and but here we'll just go through it quickly, and I'll find my class file here, Revit, establishing Revit templates and standards. And let's say that I've got this chain link model pattern that I want to bring in, and it must be a model pattern. Okay, let me do that instead. So I'll make sure it's a model pattern instead. So we'll do New, and then Custom, and Import, and Chain Link. Go ahead and bring it in here, and so you see the model pattern that will be visible in a 3D view, for example. You can change the scale to something else should you want to do so, and then go ahead and click OK, and there we go. We have now a custom pattern, or custom hatch pattern that we developed over the years, and it's now available to us in Revit. Okay, and Revit to be applied to our objects as needed. Okay, so a nice little thing to know, especially as a BIM manager, and getting those are obviously very important, and we cover these extensively in the other classes. That said, real quickly, if you go to the View tab, you have what we refer to as view templates. I'm just going to describe what's going on here. View templates give you the power in Revit of quickly applying properties of a view. And if you've ever worked with View for this plan, lots of properties, and you can tweak these ever so slightly in 100 different ways. And a lot of times then once we've tweaked them to have the view looking exactly like we want it to, then we realize, hey, I want to apply the properties of this view to all these other plan views. And that's what view templates are essentially about. We have these view templates that can quickly be applied or assigned to other views in the project. And so that way we can standardize our views, and that's a BIM manager's dream, right? To be able to quickly standardize our views across potentially hundreds and hundreds of views in a project, so that way we present, and other projects as well, so we present a united standard look for our deliverables, and that's what this is all about. So you can edit, your categories and everything, just so your view looks just the way you want, and that's where this is accessed under the view templates. Okay, view types. Those can be important. They kind of work with the view templates. If you go to view and then do plan views here, floor plans, and you can have different view types. So you can have a floor plan, you can have a finished floor plan, not a reflected ceiling plan, because that's a different system family, view system family. But you can create different floor plans. You can have on the MEP side, you could have definitely an electrical floor plan or a power floor plan versus a plumbing floor plan or a hydronics floor plan if you want to get more specific, even HVAC mechanical floor plan, etc. You can have your different floor view types, and then have view templates essentially assigned to those views. Okay, so those are, and they're a great way as well to organize the way things are viewed here in your project browser as well. So again, that's part of the BIM manager's task. Okay, starting views. A lot of times we want to have a starting view in Revit, and I'll just talk about that real quick. So a starting view, the reason why as a BIM manager we want to have a starting view is we are able in this basic drafting view to provide instruction to our users, do this and then that. And the idea is this will be the starting view of the project, and this actually serves twofold purpose. It gives the users instructions when they open up the project. Let me show you how to actually establish this as a starting view. So you go to Manage Starting View. We'll hit Cancel here, and we actually find this drafting view, starting view as a starting view. So each time the user opens up the project, when they created a project from this template, they see this view first, gives them instructions, and it also enables them to they don't go into a 3D view where it takes a long time to load. They get a quick load, it opens up real quickly, and they can then specify which views they actually want to see instead of a big 3D view with lots of going on. And it basically makes your organization a little bit more efficient when you use starting views. Okay, other things to be considered of, and I'm not going to spend as much time because we're running out of time here, and just a lot to cover here in this class. But phases, you as a BIM manager, depending on whether you do a lot of renovation projects or not, you may have a renovation template and then kind of a standard ground up template where you have the phases built in. But that said, with phasing, we actually have a class on phasing. For most renovation projects, this is all you need. So, but again, that's another class, that's another subject. It merits its own hour-long class, really. But the point is that phasing might be something that you might want to be considerate of when setting up your project. Other views like schedules, you can go ahead and create your own schedules here that are preset, so that way users, when they actually, like a door schedule for example, you build a door schedule inside the template using the view schedules and schedule quantities, specified door schedule for example, and then you put in the fields that you want here. And the idea is once you've got this set up just the way you want it, just leave it alone, and then when the user uses this template to create their new projects, then it will populate automatically with the information that they need. Other things to be aware of real quick: project and shared parameters. We have classes on those through the Pinnacle series. Manage project parameters. If you need additional data that you want to assign to categories of objects, you use project and shared parameters to do so. And that allows you to tag additional information that may not be available to you out of the box. And then finally, if you're MEP or structural, there are special settings that you want to be aware of because it'll affect your documentation, detailing, and your modeling. So mechanical settings for the plumbers and the piping engineers and the The HVAC engineers, a lot of settings here. We have a class on that. And for the electrical engineers, they have their own settings to be aware of. That again, as a BIM manager, you want to make sure that these are set to the appropriate settings, so that way your engineers and your technicians have what they need to get started. Because a lot of times, if they don't, they'll have to create their own distribution systems, or they'll have to create their own voltage definitions, so that way they can actually start working with their model. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. Um, for the class today. One thing I will mention here is work sharing comes up a lot as a question in this class. And work sharing and templates do not work together. And the reason is because work sharing is meant to be kind of a per project by project organization of the project, so that way multiple users can use the project concurrently. And that should vary. It doesn't always vary, but it should vary from project to project as far as how the project workload is going to be divided up. Okay, so work sets won't work with your project templates. That is you'll once your user actually creates an excuse me, creates a new project from the project template, then they'll your either your BIM leader or your BIM manager will go ahead and set up the work sharing for that specific project. Okay, that said, let's go ahead and let me get a drink of water here.